The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Rhode Island seek recognition?
I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for bringing up this really important piece of legislation, bipartisan legislation for markup today. I must confess, my head is hurting a little bit because I'm trying to understand how an effort to stop violent domestic terrorism in my country is a divisive issue, and how we're again talking about school boards and critical race theory. But I'm going to do my best to bring us back to actually the subject at hand. There is no question about it. Domestic terrorism is on the rise. In fact, a recent analysis from the Center for Strategic and International Studies showed that domestic terrorism in 2020 was at its highest level since information started being collected almost 3 decades ago. This impacts the safety and security of every American, and especially minorities. It's important to remember that 2/3 of domestic terrorist plots were linked to alt-right extremists or white supremacy groups. 2/3. And according to Michael McGarry, the assistant director of the counterterrorism division of the FBI in 2019, and I quote, racially motivated violent extremists are responsible for the majority of lethal attacks and fatalities perpetrated by domestic terrorists since 2000, end quote. So this seems like something we ought to be addressing as members of Congress, and that's exactly what this bill does. These terrorists, often linked to white supremacist groups, have begun to massively organize and even infiltrate some of our law enforcement agencies and the armed forces. And domestic terrorists pose a threat to police officers here in the Capitol and all across this country. We've seen what these statistics look like in real life. Across the country, we've witnessed massive increases in violence and terrorism against minorities, bomb threats at HBCUs and Jewish synagogues, and shootings targeting Black churches, synagogue, Asian American establishments, and a Sikh temple, and a devastating attack on communities like El Paso. Congress and our law enforcement agencies need to act. And today we need to start by passing this bipartisan bill, the Domestic Terrorism Prevention Act, to create offices at the DOJ, the FBI, and the DHS to monitor, investigate, and prosecute cases of domestic terrorism. That shouldn't be a controversial statement. This bill would also improve and streamline information sharing and training systems between different law enforcement agencies, including at the local and state level, to better our understanding of and response to incidents of domestic terrorism and white supremacy. Finally, it would establish an interagency task force to combat white supremacist infiltration in our military and federal law enforcement, something I hope everyone can agree is important. We've passed this legislation out of this committee in previous Congresses, and we must do it again today. And to listen to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, again, attempt to take this very serious issue, which has brought incredible suffering and even death to so many Americans, and families have experienced tremendous loss as a result of these violent domestic terrorists, and to refuse to address this issue and instead to hijack this hearing to talk about other politically advantageous claims about critical race theory and school boards and Merrick Garland is profoundly disrespectful to the communities and victims of this horrendous violence. And frankly, this notion of again trying to use this as an opportunity to make the false claim that Democrats don't support police is really, really disappointing. So let me say it again. We had an opportunity not just to use a slogan about funding the police, but to actually show who supports and funds police in this country. And so we included $350 billion that we made explicitly available to local police to deal with issues of rising crime in the American Rescue Plan. It may surprise some of my Republican colleagues, but I'll remind them again, every single one of them, including every member of this committee, voted against funding the police in the American Rescue Plan. Every single Democrat, save one, voted to fund the police and provide $350 billion to help police address issues of increasing crime. So, it's a little rich to claim you're for funding the police and to claim the other folks are, and the facts are exactly the opposite. But what's most disappointing is even when everyone was reminded of their individual votes by Mr. Lieu in the last hearing, you continue to make this claim rather than addressing this very serious issue of domestic violent extremism and white supremacy in our country, which this bill does. Instead of even working on this issue, you use it as an opportunity to yet again make the false claim that Democrats don't support the police and you do. It's shameful. You've tried it for 4 hearings. You try to hijack every hearing out. Support this bill and show once and for all you are for supporting our police and ending domestic terrorism in America. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back for what purpose?